Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you here today to talk more in depth about the exhibition Dress Up and the jewelry that's currently on view at the MFA. We have 90 minutes together, which feels like such a luxury. So I'm going to talk for a little over an hour, and then we're going to have time for Q&A, and I look forward to hearing all of your questions and comments. So Dress Up opened about a month ago in the Foster Gallery right outside of this space, and I hope that many of you have had a chance to see it. But in case you haven't, I'm going to spend the first few minutes giving you a little bit of an overview of that exhibition and some of the highlights, and then we'll go more closely into some of the fashion and jewelry partnerships that are in that exhibition space. So we dress the part every day, from the simple little black dress paired with statement-making jewelry to head-to-toe sequins and sparkles. We blur the imagined and real lines between fashion and jewelry and consider the interplay between them. By the early 20th century, mass production resulted in shifts in fashion and jewelry industries, and ready-to-wear clothing bought right off the rack in standard sizes or costume or fashion jewelry designed to complement seasonal styles kind of democratized the wearing of jewelry. And this exhibition, I like to joke, is 6 years in the making, and it really is. It was put together to celebrate a large acquisition, a transformative acquisition that was given by the Toronto-based jewelry collector Carol Tannenbaum back in 2018 and 2019. And here, the exhibition really celebrates that intersection of fashion and jewelry. And Theo and I really wanted to blur that line between what is fashion and what is jewelry. It had started out thinking more closely about costume jewelry, but quickly shifted to think more broadly about the ways in which fashion and jewelry come together on the body and is used to mark both the everyday and special events. So today we'll take a closer look at some of the design partnerships featured in the exhibition, like Chanel and Verdura, Holston and Peretti, Karina Emmerich, and Tiffany Vanderhoop, to name a few, and discover the exciting ways that fashion and jewelry can be presented together. This slide here are the three dresses that open up the exhibition, and I want to especially note the ensemble in the middle, which I acquired around the same time that I was acquiring the gifts from Carol Tannenbaum. When I discovered Jean-Paul Gaultier's 2019, Spring-Summer 2019 collection, I was really stopped in my tracks because it did many of the things that I had been looking to do in an acquisition and hadn't yet seen, in that it paired fashion and jewelry in a runway look. And so this ensemble, which is called Big in Japan, was a partnership between Gaultier and a local designer, a local artist based in Lexington, actually, named Mariko Kusamoto. And he discovered Mariko's work, as we'll hear and look more closely at in a little bit, at MoMA. And together they created about 20 runway looks for that fashion show. And here is one of them. And so we were lucky to bring that into the exhibition and to foreground the exhibition around it, because it did kind of speak to so many of the themes that the exhibition explores. And it's flanked here on either side, on the left by a dress by Bob Mackie that I like to describe as liquid gold, and on the right a Givenchy ensemble that was designed by Alexandra McQueen and that's made of silver sequins. As you enter the space and you go around the corner, it's a little bit of a funky space because you come in to the middle of it and you have to choose to go left or right, and you really can appreciate the show in either direction, but we tend to take the tours to the left first. And as you go through the exhibition, you'll see that each section has a quote that's bold and stands out to begin each section. And if you go through and that's all you read, I hope that you get a sense of what we're trying to capture. And as you're standing here looking at this case, on your right is a quote from Kate Spade that says, "Dress up is something that starts when you're 5 and never truly ends." And that's really what we were trying to capture here. There's this child's play quality of dressing up, but really we do this all the time as we prepare for a job interview, for a special event, for a lecture, for anything that brings us out and about. I think it will surprise many of you to hear that this is really the first exhibition that I know of that gives fashion and jewelry equal footing. Certainly there's many fashion exhibitions that have a little bit of jewelry and a lot of jewelry exhibitions that have a little bit of fashion, but here both are considered together as equal in creating the style and the look of an era. And we do that in bits throughout the exhibition because we're not always able to bring the clothing and the jewelry together on a mannequin. But in the group that you're looking at here, we do that. And so here we have 3 ensembles from the second half of the 20th century where we start to see an array of fashion styles and collaborations between fashion and jewelry designers. These partnerships took on various forms to create a signature style and to make it easier for consumers that were looking to create a look. You could just like one-stop shopping. On the left, starting in 1957, the Italian Prince of Prints, Emilio Pucci, partnered with Coppola e Toppo, or Lydia Toppo to be more specific, of Coppola e Toppo, to create this bold more is more aesthetic that you see with this colorful printed caftan and the blue glass jewelry. And in the middle, a more minimalist aesthetic of Holston and Peretti. Halston designed this incredible, languid, one-shoulder dress that's just perfect for pairing bold accessories by Elsa Peretti. And here we have the small bone cuff and a lacquer bag held in the mannequin's hand. Ultimately, it's the wearer who chooses what to put together. For example, the fashion leader, the centenarian who recently passed away, Iris Apfel, at 100+ years old, who was known for layering stacks of bracelets and necklaces with great aplomb. And here we borrowed this last ensemble from the Peabody Essex Museum. Peabody Essex has a number of Apfel's ensembles and jewelry, which are paired to go together. And so you can imagine about 5 of us crowded into that case, putting the necklaces on just right, just as Iris would have done in her closet, I'm sure. If you look to the left there, you see that we've been able to take these ideas that are presented in that case and look more deeply at the jewelry that's there and think about the stacking of jewelry, the layering of necklaces. And so I encourage you to take a look more closely at what you see there. There's some real highlights here that we'll take a closer look at in a few minutes. Another spectacular loan in the exhibition are these cuff bracelets that belong to Gabrielle Coco Chanel. These were made for her around 1930 by Verdura and are lent to us from Verdura. Jewelry was an essential part of the Chanel look, and the fashion designer's deceptively simple garments offered the perfect canvas for bold jewelry. She was considered her own best model, and she was often photographed in the 1930s by luminaries like Man Ray wearing multiple necklaces and this set of matched bracelets. And in the gallery, I've positioned them just as she's wearing them in the photograph that's there on the label, because as you look close, you'll see that each is slightly different. They have a little bit of a different shape and different choices in terms of the gemstones that are featured there. We'll look more closely at the inspiration. A real fan favorite in the exhibition has been this group here. This is an ensemble on the right by Emmy Studios, Karina Emmerich of Project Runway fame, and Tiffany Vanderhoop, who we'll look at more closely. On the left is an ensemble, a robe that was woven by Tiffany Vanderhoop's mother, Evelyn Vanderhoop, in which we'll look at some pictures of her dancing in a ceremony that we held just outside these doors about 5 years ago. Greatly influenced by her mother and her grandmother's textile weavings, Tiffany Vanderhoop creates bead earrings using traditional symbols and motifs. Her mother, Evelyn Vanderhoop, weaves by hand in Haida Gwaii in the Pacific Northwest, and we commissioned this robe to be made, and it was danced here in 2018. Tiffany's Wampanoag and Haida, and she works locally in Shrewsbury and Akina, and these were made locally, and so we're excited throughout the exhibition, and you'll hear more from Theo next week on the local designers that we've been able to highlight in the exhibition. On the right, I came to see this ensemble when I saw the Santa Fe Indian Market Fashion Show back in 2022, and was just as excited as I was when I saw the Gautier Ensemble to see the way fashion and jewelry came together on the runway and really came to life. Because there are such limited opportunities throughout the exhibition to show that fashion and jewelry together, we've relied on photography and examples from our photography collection to help to show the way that jewelry and fashion plays a role in fantasy. Fueled by media images and the glamour of Hollywood, fashion and shopping offers a way to bring our imagination, this imagined life, to life. And we close the exhibition asking visitors to think about their own daily ritual. How do you get dressed? What is your style? What role does jewelry play to you? And we have this wall for you to choose from. We ask you to imagine that this is your closet and to think about what you might choose and what you would wear it with. Many of these names of jewelers are long forgotten, but I hope that the exhibition will bring to life some of the names that should not have been forgotten. And for us here in Boston, I think one of the exciting things about researching this collection was that many of these jewels, while they were designed in New York, were made here locally in places like North Attleboro and Providence, Rhode Island. And so for many people, I think that's a surprise for them to learn that Providence, Rhode Island in particular, is America's jewelry capital. I hear the shocked sounds, yes. To look more closely at three of my favorites from that wall, on the left, this is a double clip brooch from Coro. And I pulled these three out to showcase that, while costume jewelry is made in non-precious materials, glass, plastics, it does not lack design and creativity or quality craftsmanship. Coro was founded in 1901 by Emanuel Cohen and Carl Rosenberger. And the firm was based in New York with a factory in Providence where they manufactured their jewelry designs. And this was a model that many jewelry companies followed. In 1935, during the Great Depression, Coro introduced the highly successful duet. This is an example of the duet on the left. This is a double clip brooch that could be worn alternately as a brooch or as two clips. Over time, various collections were introduced. Debutante was for young girls, Coro Craft was more costly. From 1937 on, the company began systematically patenting its designs by designers like Adolphe Katz, Jean Very, Marion Weber. Very's quivering camellia, which you'll see in the exhibition, borrows techniques from fine jewelry, where it was set to actually be un tremblant and actually to move or to tremble as the wearer wore it. The flowers are on springs, and so they were made to move. Among the jewelry on the wall, the earrings in the center and the necklace that goes with it are the only examples made in Europe. These were designed to be presented with Lanvin's Haute Couture collection in 2012. And this is an example of bijoux de couture. This jewelry is made in very limited numbers, unlike the more mass-produced American examples. And like the haute couture more generally, they anticipate changes in seasonal fashions. And then on the right, another piece from the 30s, which is designed by Frank Hess for Miriam Haskell, who was known for producing high-quality handmade jewelry using European materials. Her extravagant jewels brightened ensembles during the Depression and the war years, and when women could afford precious jewels and didn't want to flaunt it, they went with hers instead. This was the moment of cocktail rings and cocktail jewelry and fun novelty jewels. And by 1933, Haskell had occupied 3 floors in a Fifth Avenue building, and by 1936, they opened a boutique at Saks Fifth Avenue. She presented 5 collections a year, and each included options to be worn in the evening, afternoon, and day wear. Her collectors included Joan Crawford and Lucille Ball, who often wore Haskell jewelry on television. And one of the things I love about this necklace is that it's not quite a necklace. You can stretch it out to be a long string like a scarf, and on the back of each of these flowers is a clip. And so you could wrap it around your neck and clip it to your neckline and wear it slightly differently each time. These designs are incredibly creative and would allow you to look slightly different each time you put them on. Now let's talk and think a little bit about what costume jewelry is, because I have to say that it's something I struggled with throughout the exhibition, because every time I would try and define it, the definition would kind of fall apart. If I said it was made of inexpensive materials, it was like someone would say, well, what about, artist-made jewelry that's using like found materials and non-precious objects? And it was like, you're right, so that doesn't work. Or what about fashion jewelry? What about Elsa Peretti made in silver? Is that costume jewelry? So it was a bit tricky to try and figure out where the boundaries of costume jewelry lied, and it's one of the reasons that instead in the exhibition we chose to look at the way that fashion and jewelry come together. But I wanted to share with you these two, an advertisement on the left and a magazine article on the right, to help share the ways that the definition has evolved over the years. So starting in the 18th century, jewelry became less precious. Jewelers offered the effect of diamonds using cut steel. They placed colored foils behind clear quartz or later under glass, and they used plastics to create the look of gemstones. The Industrial Revolution made it faster to produce jewelry designs, and the result was jewelry that was stylistically bold and much less costly than fine jewelry. By the 20th century, these technological changes allowed jewelry to more readily respond to seasonal fashion changes. Because of its connection to clothing, this type of jewelry became known as costume jewelry or fashion jewelry. Closely aligned, the two phrases have slightly different meanings. Fashion jewelry was primarily made in Italy or France, using glass beads or poured glass and presented by European fashion designers as part of their seasonal collections. In the United States, costume jewelry was more accessible. In the 20th century, it was largely designed in New York and mass-produced in Southeastern Massachusetts and Providence, Rhode Island. It was then retailed by American department stores who were selling ready-to-wear garments. Under American direction, costume jewelry embraced a three-pronged mix that simultaneously offered less expensive copies of fine jewelry styles. This was sometimes called the look of the real. It was created in partnership with fashion designers, which is more of what we're going to hear about today, and it created novelty jewelry that was just colorful, fun, and inexpensive. Regardless of what country produced it, the jewelry incorporated these inexpensive materials and glass or plastic gems or enamel. In all instances, the jewelry tended to be designed at a large scale or worn layered and stacked for the maximum visual impact. So here on the left, this is an advertisement from Osby and Barton Company. And you can see there it says Providence, Rhode Island. This was in Vogue in 1916. This is the first time that Vogue mentions the phrase costume jewelry. And what they mean by costume jewelry when you look close and you read the captions is jewelry using semi-precious gemstones, which is a surprise. It's nothing like the costume jewelry we think of today. And as for some of you who are longstanding members of the MFA, you'll remember an exhibition called Boston Made back in 2018 to 2020, which showed Boston arts and crafts jewelry. Boston arts and crafts jewelers were sometimes called costume jewelers in advertisements, which is not at all what you'd think. They were making jewelry in limited production, really small studios and selling to a unique clientele. So not really the mass production that you think of with costume jewelry. And then fast forward to 1937, and you see this beautiful display of jewelry that's being called junk jewelry, which is the way that sometimes costume jewelry is referred to. And yet here, as I look, I see copies of designs by Black Star and Frost and others that were made in fine jewelry, and here being copied in less costly materials and made more accessible to a larger audience. So even historically, there's no consensus on what we're talking about. And so what I thought we would do today is to think about the ways that fashion designers and jewelry designers have come together. This is something I've been interested in for a long time, thinking about the way that these partnerships come to be and the jewelry that's created and the style that's created out of them. So I thought we would look chronologically and start with Verdura and Chanel, beginning in the 1920s. So Folco de Verdura and Gabrielle Chanel met in the 1920s. Jewelry was an essential part of the Chanel look, as I said, and here, she was known for these matched bracelets that you see Verdura here holding in his hands and presenting to Chanel, and they're looking closely at it. The design had come about from a trip that the two had taken in 1925 to Ravenna in Italy, where they had traveled to the Basilica San Vitale and seen the mosaics there of Empress Theodora. And those mosaics inspired these bracelets, which have this Maltese cross design on them. Like the camellia flower, the quilted fabric, two-tone shoes, gold chains, this Maltese cross really became an emblem of the Chanel lexicon. And the style also became a signature of Verdura's when he established himself in New York in 1939. So here we get a closer look at what's on the label there in dress up, where you see Chanel as we know her, right, layers of pearls, cigarette hanging out of her mouth, and her matched bracelets, and here the bracelets themselves on the left. And you can see they're slightly different, the shapes are different, they're pretty beaten up, so you know she wore them all the time. Somebody asked me earlier today if they're ivory. They're not ivory, they're actually enamel, and there's some enamel repair on it that's created a yellowing effect on the back, but that also makes it look in some ways even more like ivory. And that was the intent, for them to look like that. The Maltese cross, this kind of square cross, was a design that's deeply rooted in the Mediterranean. And it was one that later Chanel brought into other elements of her jewelry design, things like buttons, for example. Chanel had established herself in 1912 as a hat shop, and over time evolved into the couturier that we know her as today. And generally, she had no problems mixing real and faux jewelry to create a look. It was all about a look. And later, she went on to produce jewelry as well, using producers like Gripoix and Coco to create jewelry that was based on her own aesthetic and her own personal tastes in jewelry. The style tended to use a bare minimum setting where really the gemstones popped to the front and it emphasized the stones over the setting. She used carved cabochons that were set slightly unevenly, and if you look at this original pair from Verdura, so much of what comes after that becomes part of the Chanel jewelry look really comes from this original partnership in 1925. Here's a look again at that picture of the two of them together and a look at what inspired them. These were the mosaics that they were looking at, that they had visited together, that the design came out of. Chanel had no problem being copied. She invented the little black dress, and of course everyone went on to make a little black dress thereafter. And so I wonder how she felt about the fact that her bracelets were copied many, many times over by people like Robert Goossens, a goldsmith that she herself employed to copy them, and by someone like Kenneth J. Lane, who made a career copying things and making what he called fabulous fakes. I included this picture on the right of Diana Vreeland sitting here in her famous red living room with a similar bracelet. This is Kenneth J. Lane, and I scanned this out of the Sotheby's catalog of Diana Vreeland's jewelry sale in 1987, which included many pairs of similar bracelets by Goossens, by Chanel, by Kenneth J. Lane, that were all in the same style, but different materials, slightly different colors, but nonetheless it showed how deeply rooted this design was. It looked like Chanel, even if Chanel didn't make it. And you can see the note there as well. So Chanel dies in 1971, and there's a bit of a lag between designers. And so the house is cranking out this design lexicon that she created for about a decade before Karl Lagerfeld joins in 1983. And when he has his first presentation of haute couture, this is the look that he sends down the runway. If you visited the Met Museum recently to see either the Lagerfeld show or the jewelry exhibition that they had a number of years ago, you saw this dress, homage to Coco Chanel, and maybe you realized that what looks like bracelets and a belt and necklaces is actually embroidered into the dress. And the model here on the left, this is actually a tricky picture to track down. You see her coming down, modeled after Chanel, made to look like Chanel. Gabrielle Chanel said, costume jewelry is not made to give women an aura of wealth, but to make them beautiful. It was seen as an accessory, and she famously, combined styles. For jewelry, and you'll see this necklace in the Jewelry Gallery Beyond Brilliance installation, he also really was looking at Chanel's history. Lagerfeld was a great researcher, and he liked to dive into the house's archives and to pull elements out of that into his more contemporary collections. So in that same presentation in 1983, he showed this necklace on the right. This was a necklace that was copied from a design that Chanel had done in 1933. Chanel did many jewelry collections over the course of her long career, but she only did one collection that used real diamonds, and that was in 33. She says that she did it because she had many friends in the jewelry business, and this was the height of the Depression, and she wanted to support them by doing a collection. Here on the left, you can see some installation shots of what that 33 collection looked like. And if you look on the bottom, the second mannequin in, the second bust in, is wearing the version of this necklace that Lagerfeld copied for this collection. So copying is just part of the way that the style becomes understood at Chanel. Another thing that Lagerfeld did, and that you'll see brought out in the exhibition, is that he pulled out a chain element, which is an invisible element in Chanel's designs. Her boucle suit that was introduced in 1954 in a collection known as her comeback collection. And those of you who have watched the look and you've seen what she was doing, in the years after the war, and you felt that tension, she was wanting to come back. She comes back in 54 and she creates many of the looks that we now know her for, among them the suit, the two-piece boucle suit. And the suit was very lightweight in material, and in a way to make the jacket hang perfectly, she put a chain in the hem of it. And that chain has since been taken outside of that to become a key part of her jewelry and accessories. And in the bracelets on the left and the chain of the light bulb necklace in the middle and on the model on the right, you see that as a major element of the Chanel look. The bracelets on the left, I want to point out, belong to Anna Piaggi. Anna Piaggi was an Italian editor known for her outlandish style and a major client at Chanel, and I have yet to find a picture of her wearing them, but I did find that she had a champagne holder that matched, so that was kind of fun. And yes, the light bulb shoes do turn on. These designs were made about 10 years apart, or 20 years apart. It's interesting that you can see the way that technology has shifted, because the light bulb necklace is a solid material, and there's no way it could light up. It doesn't have the technology in it. But fast forward, and when the shoes were designed, the technology existed to make it so that they actually function as little light bulbs. We tried to figure out a way to put that into the exhibition, but. So perhaps Chanel's one of the better known artists that I'm going to talk to you about, but lesser known is someone like Hattie Carnegie, who was born in Vienna and emigrated to the United States in 1900 as a teenager. Early in her career, she borrowed the surname of one of America's richest men, Andrew Carnegie, and she reinvented herself as Hattie Carnegie. In 1909, she opened Carnegie Ladies Hatter with her friend Rose Roth, and by the end of World War I, she bought her partner out to create her own eponymous label. She was catering to a fashionable client on both sides of the Atlantic, and she built a multi-million-dollar empire that included hats, perfume, jewelry, custom-made and ready-to-wear clothing. And it's important to note, too, that ready-to-wear clothing is a relatively new thing at this moment, and that American design is a relatively new thing in the 1930s. Most people, if they could afford it, were more interested in European fashion that was more custom designed and custom made than American ready-to-wear off-the-rack fashions. But Carnegie was incredibly well known in the field, and she employed designers like Pauline Tregear, James Galanos, Norman Norell, artists who we'll look at more closely in a moment. Each one of them at one point or another was part of her atelier. Her company continued to design and to make jewelry after her death until 1976. During World War II, with a shortage of glass beads from Austria and Czechoslovakia and a severing from the creative inspiration of Paris, jewelry adopted an American style, and Carnegie and others like those I've mentioned really became key players in creating that style. Brooches in particular became symbols of support for the war effort, and until 1942, white metal alloys used copper, tin, zinc, and nickel. But after the U.S. officially became part of the war on December 7th, 1941, the use of base metals was prohibited in the costume jewelry industry, and the materials shifted. Gold plating replaced rhodium plating, and costume jewelers shifted to approved metals like lead and sterling silver until the end of 1947. Here on the left, you see one of Hattie Carnegie's suits that date to about the same period as this brooch in the middle, where you see the silk flower and these big gemstones that are known as Aurora Borealis gemstones, probably made by Swarovski, who supplied many of the gems to these jewelers. And on the right, Sarah Jessica Parker wearing this in a contemporary way, a vintage brooch on the red carpet in 2008. So you'll hear many of the designers who I mentioned who worked for Carnegie went on to have their own established businesses where they also sought to partner with jewelry artists to create a look. And among them was Schreiner, a name that's probably unfamiliar to many of you. Schreiner worked closely with a handful of New York fashion designers, including Pauline Trégère. Born in Paris, Trégère spent the early years of her career in France before emigrating to the United States, like so many of these artists and designers did in 1937. She worked for Carnegie before opening her own label in 1942, and she was known for creating high-end, ready-to-wear fashions, and she employed Schreiner to create the jewelry to go with that. Designed and fabricated in New York, Schreiner founded his company in 1932, and they catered in the early years largely to coat companies. But by the late 40s and 50s, they were also known for creating jewelry in unusual color combinations and unique jewels that went with fashions of the day and that were part of this made in America, American ready-to-wear look that was gaining popularity. By the 1940s, Schreiner's clients included Trégère, Maurice Rentner, Norman Norell, Adele Simpson, and others, and many were designed in partnership with those fashion designers to go with a seasonal style. Here you can see two covers of Vogue magazine from the 1950s, 1950 on the left and 53 in the middle, showcasing different Schreiner brooches. And then on the right, a brooch from the MFA's collection. I think that brooches get a bad rap, and I'd like to see people get more creative about the ways that they might wear them. The supermodel in the center, Dovima, who's most famously known for her Avedon picture with the elephants, is here wearing a brooch just below her waistline, I think very beautifully. Schreiner, like so many, sold in local department stores. Here you can see an installation in Neiman Marcus in Dallas in 1952, where the jewelry was presented alongside many others. Carol Tannenbaum and Eve Townsend wrote a book on Schreiner jewelry that was published maybe 10 years ago that really shed light on the story of the company. And I love Eve's story of becoming fascinated by the company and not knowing very much about it. And so she somehow tracked down where the Schreiner descendants lived, and she went and knocked on their door. And the man who answered said, "You're wearing my jewelry." And it started this dialogue between them, and together they wrote the book on Schreiner and really shed light onto this very well-known in its day company that had, that is not as well remembered as one would like. And I think that's the case with many of the jewelers in the exhibition. And so I hope that this exhibition will help to reintroduce some of these names to people. This is a photograph that was taken for the cover of Life magazine of the model Susie Parker wearing Norman Norell, one of his mermaid dresses, with Schreiner jewelry. This is that look of the real that I was talking about. It's meant to look like a diamond fringe necklace. One of the things that Norell was known for were these sequins dresses, and I wish that we had one in the show. And what he would do with them is he made a very simple wool coat that went over it. If it was the long dress, it was called the mermaid dress. If it was the short dress, it was called the subway dress. And when you wore this very plain wool coat buttoned up over it, you had no idea what you were going to get when the person walked into the room and opened up to see this incredible sequins dress. And oftentimes the inside of the coat was also sequins to make this very dramatic presentation. I was delighted and surprised to see that we have a Schreiner example in the Arnold Scaasi collection. Some of you might remember seeing this ensemble years ago when we presented the Scaasi exhibition back in like 2008. You can see the Schreiner brooch here as part of the ornament that holds up the sash. And you can see here just the ways in which the jewelry and fashions were integrated into a design. This exists, as successfully as it does because of that brooch at the waistline, versus other examples where the pieces were made to be more individualized and you could put things together as you wished. We were able to do that a little bit in the exhibition in this pairing here, where we had acquired the brooch on the right as part of Carol's collection. This is a starburst brooch that dates to probably from the 1960s. And in researching Schreiner, we came across an advertisement on the left that showcased this Pauline Trégère dress, similar to a cape in our collection, with this big starburst brooch in the middle. And so it was very exciting to be able to then, in the exhibition, put those things together and to show how they could have been worn. Similarly surprising to that element that you see in Norell's designs, this cape has a green lining, bright green, and we tried to give you a little bit of a peek of that in the exhibition so that you can see a little bit of that pop of color that I think is a really unexpected surprise. So coming back to Coppola e Toppo, who I showed you in that opening slide with Pucci, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about this company that's also one of these lesser-known companies. But in 1971, Lydia Toppo was named one of the women who changed Italian taste. And yet many of us don't know her name today. Her work began in Paris in the late 40s, and you can see some of her jewelry designs in this photograph on the left. She sought to create something more original than simply copies of real jewels. And it was a bit too outlandish in some ways for the Italian market at the time, but it became part of the Made in Italy movement that comes after the war. But during the 40s and 50s, she supplied designs to haute couture houses like Jacques Fath, Jean Lanvin, and Christian Dior, and made jewelry that was intended to go with fashion. On the right, you see a more kind of a break with that haute couture style in this caftan photograph with Coppola e Toppo jewelry that's worn by the model Donna Luna, a very famous fashion model in her day. This very dramatic portrait that's a real break with the kind of rigidity of the haute couture that you see on the left there. Lydia Toppo had been born in Venice, and she had studied art, and she went after the war to France to make a presentation of jewelry. And she just marched right into the French Vogue offices and presented her jewelry to them, and they were impressed. In those days, I guess you could do that, and they were impressed with what they brought, and they gave her a letter of introduction that she then brought around to a lot of the fashion houses that opened the door and allowed her to begin her business there. Over time, with the help of her brother, they actually established a space in 1950 in Milan, and they began to develop more of an Italian clientele then. And in 1957, they partnered with Pucci to design many jewelry collections with his unmistakable Pucci prints. He became Coppola e Toppo's best client. Fashion magazines at the time said there was a need for more colorful jewelry, more visible, more modern, definitely more personal, and above all, each piece had to be made for a certain outfit. She really felt strongly that every outfit in your closet needed its own jewelry to go with it. I think we all agree, right? And so here you get a closer look at those pieces that are paired in the exhibition, and you see how much more beautiful they look together than apart. Also, a closer look at the magazine that's in the exhibition with the jewelry that's on the right. Elsa Schiaparelli, the fashion designer Elsa Schiaparelli, was influential in introducing Lydia's work to an American market. Lord & Taylor was the first American customer that they had, and until the mid-50s, none of the clients made specific requests. Instead, Lydia would design a collection, and the fashion designers would come in and pick from that, and that gave her a creative freedom to design whatever she pleased. Later, as she got more ingrained in partnerships with fashion designers, they would work together to create something that worked really well for the seasonal presentations, but in her early days, she had much more creative freedom. In 1960, Neiman Marcus sponsored Italian Fortnights, which was a 15-day exhibition in Dallas that was dedicated to Italian products. And it introduced high fashion. Inviting Coppola e Toppo meant that the U.S. was recognizing the capacity of the Italian jewelry industry and operating at a more international level than we had before. That year, they received an award for the best creators of fashion jewelry. And here you see the model Verushka modeling this bracelet, which she's holding in her hand, and these earrings in this fantasy world as if she's going through this bamboo forest here. So if we skip ahead, another Italian designer is Elsa Peretti. And her work is a bit of a break with the jewelers we've seen before, which have used glass and plastics. Instead, Elsa Peretti was really most interested in silver. She started her career working as a fashion model. She had been born to a wealthy family in Rome, but had fled Rome for Barcelona when she was looking for independence and a break with her family. And she there became part of a tight-knit community that included people like Salvador Dali and others. And she became a model and a muse to many of those artists. And with the support of Wilhelmina Models, she was encouraged to move to New York. And she moved to New York, and at first she really relied on those Italian connections that she could find. And she became friendly with the fashion designer Giorgio di Sant'Angelo. And you can see Elsa Peretti and Giorgio on the left. I have studied this picture so many times, and I still like do a double take, realizing that that's Elsa Peretti in the front, because it looks so different than the ways that we think of her looking now. But there she is, kind of presenting this more 60s style. And then on the right, in Vogue magazine, she's wearing one of her original flask necklaces. And if you go into Beyond Brilliance, you'll see a special presentation of Elsa Peretti's jewelry. That gallery was actually, the renovation of that gallery was actually supported by the Nando and Elsa Peretti Foundation. Elsa Peretti died 2 years ago, and we have an extraordinary collection of her work, and I had gotten to know her quite well over the last decade, and her support of that gallery was an opportunity to kind of showcase that collection, and you'll see a special presentation that as a centerpiece includes that original design, that's like a small flask on a chain, that's dually inspired by Etruscan tear catchers, and also by the flowers that she saw in Portofino as a young woman, and the way that she thought you could keep them alive by having them in a little vase around your neck. And so here on the right, see if I can use this pointer successfully. There we go. She's right here. And you see her wearing one of those original necklaces. Here, this is Naomi Sims, who you're going to see again in a minute. This is Marissa Berenson. This is Holston. All of these photos were taken by Barry Berenson, who's Marissa Berenson's sister. And all of the figures that you see here are part of a tight-knit circle. Barry and Marissa Berenson were actually the granddaughters of Elsa Schiaparelli. It's a very, tight world. And when Elsa started, she begins working with Sant'Angelo, but then quickly strikes a friendship with Holston and becomes part of this group known as the Halstonettes. But she emerges really as a leader there among them because of the way that she's also contributing to the style that he's creating through the creation of jewelry and accessories. Here, another few early designs that I'm always looking at with surprise, because they're not the minimalist designs that you think of with Elsa Peretti. On the left, you see this very wide belt. It's a leather belt. I've never seen an actual example of it. And it has this silver heart. And so you can start to see some of the elements that become part of her design lexicon presented early in the late 60s, early in her design career. And then here, another version of that pendant. This is more of a straight pendant to put just a straight stem right into. And you can see that model's also wearing that wide leather and silver belt. Now, the designs that we're more familiar with that have been created for more than 50 years are designs like these. So before Elsa Peretti joins Tiffany & Company in 1974, she's spending most of those early 1970s years working closely with Halston. She's designing belts, she's designing jewelry, and they're being showcased in Halston's presentations. She still continues to live outside of Barcelona. She, from the late 60s, begins buying houses in an area called Sant Martí that's about 2 hours outside of the city. And she's working with local silversmiths and craftsmen there that she'll make jewelry with. And so she'll come with Halston, they'll come up with a design idea, she'll go back to Barcelona and kind of create that with her silversmith. Eventually, Bloomingdale's creates a corner of the shop for her, and you can see her here in the left with a bracelet design that's known as the slice bracelet. There's 3 versions of the slice bracelet that are in the dress-up exhibition. These are in ivory. Later, they're translated into silver for Tiffany's. The ones that we have in the exhibition belong to Naomi Sims, who you see here on the right. Naomi Sims was this black supermodel who was also part of Holston's circle. And you can see her in one of many photos of her wearing these bracelets. I believe that's also an Elsa Peretti necklace that she has on, and the open sides cuff on her other hand that she's got up to her chin. This is the evolution of that first, the look that we associate more with Elsa Peretti. In the photo of Elsa on the left, you also see that she's wearing the equestrian belt, which is one of her signature designs. And so there's great examples of Elsa Peretti's jewelry and Beyond Brilliance, but then in Dress Up, we wanted to showcase more how these designs look in association with the fashion. And so these are the pieces that come together on the mannequin that I showed you a little while ago. And you see another photograph from our own collection of Elsa Peretti and Halston in Halston's New York apartment. And you can see here sequins, again, sequins and sparkle in the caftan that Peretti's wearing as she leans against that back wall. So between the two shows, it was a real moment for us to come together and to show that aspect of the collection. Holston and Peretti have a kind of a famous falling out in the mid-1970s. It comes shortly after she begins to work closely with Tiffany's. She's hired as a designer for Tiffany's in 1974, and this is a 2-page spread in Vogue magazine that calls for the Elsa Peretti phenomenon. It describes how people were lining up around the block at Tiffany's to meet Elsa, to see the new silver jewelry, and this was a way that Tiffany's hoped to be more youthful, to attract a new audience, to offer something less expensive, and to participate in fashion. In many ways, the designs that you see laying on this table on the left are still the designs that Peretti offers at Tiffany's. You can still go and get these. They have this timeless quality about them. And she describes herself as a reductivist designer, and you see that here, that she's reducing things down to their simplest form. Here's a look at that village as it was when she first started buying homes there in Saint Marthavel. Here she is with her dog on the left in front of the house that's the house she still lived in when she died and that her foundation now owns and runs. And then working with Corbero, who's one of the silversmiths she worked with throughout his life and her life to create the silver jewelry prototypes in Barcelona. Of course, we know these designs today, designs like the bone cuff, for example, of which there's a large version of it in Beyond Brilliance. There's a small version of it in Dress Up. It's made over the years in different materials with stone inlays. And what it evolves from is her childhood in Rome, where she remembers going to the catacombs and stealing bones. And she'd get home, she'd stick them in her purse, and her mother would reprimand her and send her back, but it didn't break the habit. She would always be stealing the bones and coming back. When she moved to Barcelona, when she looked at Sagrada Familia, which is still a work in progress and certainly was in the 60s, she saw Antonio Gaudi's designs, and in the architecture, she again saw bones. And when you see her bone designs done in terracotta, you really get a sense of that connection to Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. So it was that dual reference, that dual influence between her years in Barcelona and her childhood in Rome that inspired these designs. Of course, they're so iconic, and I share this to just show the way that the legacy has continued over the last 50 years. This is the bone cuff in our collection that's on view. And then in the middle, this picture, which I love, of Diana Ross from 1973, where she's wearing Peretti jewelry in Holston. I actually think it's almost the exact same dress that we have in Dress Up. It's very similar. And then her daughter here on the right, wearing Peretti jewelry, bone cuffs, and the snake necklace in such a modern way. And we have a version of this necklace, which can also be worn as a belt in the jewelry gallery. So I encourage you to go and take a closer look. Mariko Kusamoto is the designer that opens up the Dress Up exhibition, and here she is surrounded by these ethereal designs that she makes out of textiles. She's worked for quite a long time using textiles, so it's hard to believe that she used to make very precise metal jewelry that was very complex and complicated. But more recently, she's been working in textiles, and she takes these forms, makes them out of polyester, and fires them in a kiln to give the design a permanency, and then creates these sculpted textile necklaces, earrings, brooches, like this necklace in the MFA's collection, and like all of the brooches that are floating around her on the cover of American Craft. She had been selling her jewelry in MoMA's gift shop, which is where Jean-Paul Gaultier found it, and thought that it was interesting enough to invite her to do a collection with him in Paris. And so here you can see the runway look, the way that Big in Japan looked on the runway, and the way that it's styled. In talking about not knowing where fashion begins and the jewelry or where the jewelry ends and the fashion begins, this so much does that. And it's great to see it come alive on the body instead of just on the mannequin. This is an incredibly petite ensemble. There was only one mannequin that it fit on. It's like a teenager mannequin. And so you'll see that as you compare her to the others around her, this mannequin's very tiny, and that's why she's pulled to the front of the platform in the gallery. And here you can get a sense of what this same ensemble, because it is a haute couture custom piece that we purchased off the runway, looked like in that presentation. New York City Jewelry Week in 2023 awarded Tiffany Vanderhoop as the Emerging Entrepreneur Award, and she and I were supposed to have a studio visit on Zoom that same week, and she was so caught off guard by the fact that her face was in Times Square. They had projected her work into the billboards of Times Square, and she was so excited, and it's just been a real skyrocket of her career since then. Tiffany Vanderhoop is Wampanoag and Haida, and she works here locally in Akina and Shrewsbury making earrings, only earrings. And she makes these beaded earrings based on the weaving designs of her mother and her grandmother. And you see two examples of them in dress up. Now here on the left in 2021, August of 2021, you see Deb Holland, the Secretary of the Interior, wearing Tiffany Vanderhoop's earrings, a longer version of the earrings in this beautiful cover of In Style magazine. I mentioned before, and it's great to be able to show it in person, that Evelyn Vanderhoop, Tiffany's mother, had danced her robe out here in the space outside of the auditorium back in 2018. We had, as an institution, commissioned this raven's tail robe, and it took her a number of years to complete it. And she said, she needed to dance it. It needed to be danced before it went and lived in our collection. And you can see here on the right, Tiffany playing the drum as her mother danced the robe. And I love this picture because you see the fringe of the robe come alive, and you see it move and sway in a way that it can't in the galleries. We had shown this robe before, shortly after it was acquired, and we showed it flat out on the wall down in our Native American gallery. It's exciting in dress up to be able to put it back on the body and think about the way that it comes over the shoulders and is worn, and to present it alongside her daughter's jewelry. And you see these earrings on the right that are so connected to Tiffany's mother and grandmother's work. Like the Mariko Kusumoto ensemble, when I first encountered this ensemble at the Indian Market Fashion Show in August of 2022, I was really excited yet again to see the way that fashion and jewelry was presented together. Here with Karina Emmerich, who designs under Emmy Studios. She is a Project Runway alum, and here was using that fringe to hand weave the bodice with these red pants, and partnered with Tiffany Vanderhoop for a number of ensembles. I found this to be a particularly exciting one, and I like in the context of the gallery that these earrings are called My Ancestors Were Watching. And so it's nice to have those kind of watching her mother's work, I think. For Tiffany, the creating of these weavings and the making of the jewelry is personally and culturally significant because of the way it's a cultural revitalization of her Haida heritage. And I think it's really wonderful to see the way that those come to life in this space alongside the many other stories of the ways that jewelry and fashion come together. In February 2013, Lanvin presented their fall collection with these ultimate statement necklaces. In the exhibition, we have 2 of 5 nameplate-inspired necklaces that were sent down the runway. The others read cool, hot, and happy, and they were often layered to make 2-word messages. They were designed under the direction of Elber Elbaz, whose jewelry was part of a powerfully pretty, it's been described as, aesthetic that was presented at the century-old couture house. Fashion and designers add jewelry and accessories to runway presentations to achieve a desired look, and they might create separate or more saleable jewelry inspired by these. The editors at Harper's Bazaar loved these cheeky necklaces, as they called them, and they asked Elbaz to design another one for their clients that was available on Harper's Bazaar website. So that he made one that read Beyond in cursive letters, and that was for sale for $1,195 in a limited edition of 20. I love this help in the advertisement beside it. And the other one, which for us just reads so much like the Tin Man's heart in The Wizard of Oz. As I mentioned, it's really how you wear it. And we wanted to kind of close with thinking about Iris Apfel, because she really knew how to wear it, right? Known for her oversized round spectacles and stylish garments and layers of jewelry, the interior designer Iris Apfel is instantly recognizable. In 1950, she and her husband founded Old World Weavers, a textile company known for global influences, the layering of pattern, and love of color, in the same spirit that she embraces those same things in her personal fashion choices. Like the textiles she sourced, much of the jewelry that Apfel wears was collected during her world travels. Roberta Smith of the New York Times said that before multiculturalism was a word, Mrs. Apfel was wearing it. This mannequin styled as Apfel wore the ensemble with 6 necklaces, 2 bracelets, and a belt that were made by Pueblo and Diné peoples, artisans, all layered together. And you see an example of her on the left with these stacks of Bakelite bangles. She's a testament to this more is more idea that the exhibition demonstrates, and I think is so bold in her fashion and jewelry choices. And I hope that people feel inspired going through the exhibition to maybe be a bit more bold in their jewelry choices. I wanted to close just with one of my favorite images to share, the Susie Parker image. It's rare to find a redhead, so I'm glad to have one here. And to close there, and happy to take any questions that you might have.
We have microphones on either side of the room. If you raise your hand high, we'll come to you.
What museum or institution would you say has the best collection of Pauline Trégier's work?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I bet FIT or the Met probably has a really strong collection, just being in New York and being so associated with the industry. But I don't know. I'd have to look.
Hi. Well, first, thank you for giving us so much insight into this collection. This was just wonderful. I saw the exhibit on Sunday and absolutely loved it, and now I have to go back after learning everything. But I'm just curious about the creative process, because I'm sure you had so many pieces to choose from. Did you decide on the designers first and then choose their pieces, or I'm just curious about the process.
Yeah, it's a good question. This exhibition had many different iterations, and so it had started out as a very straightforward jewelry exhibition that was going to be in our jewelry gallery. It was planned to open in December of 2020. I had the checklist chosen, I had the book laid out and written, and then of course COVID happened and everything got derailed. Then it was really thematically looking at the jewelers, thinking about American versus European design, and doing, again, this idea that doesn't sound so revolutionary but really is, of thinking about how this was worn and thinking about the fashion behind it. And when things got changed and I was encouraged to think of a larger exhibition at the same time that Theo Tyson had joined us 3 years ago, we really started to think more about this idea of fashion and jewelry together and how we might partner it. But it was hard to choose the pieces. I mean, we have so many examples to pick from. Before Carol's gift, we had like a handful of costume jewelry. And afterwards, now we have almost 600 examples. And so it was hard to go through. And I knew early on that I didn't just want to show examples from that collection, but I wanted to take a broader approach. And so it was a lot of like choosing and refining and kind of cutting back. And even this exhibition, if you go into where the Modern Japan show is, we were originally supposed to be in that space, then we got moved to a bigger space. So it was really this evolution of choices. And what we did in the end is we really wanted to create these vignettes, we were calling them. These like, each area there is kind of its own moment. And once we started to do that, the jewelry kind of like, not chose itself, but it became more evident in smaller groups, kind of what we wanted to do in each of those spaces. And then that last wall, the theater of everyday life, became a place where, all the amazing things that we didn't have a total vignette to put them in became their own to think about what people might choose. But we could rotate this show many times over and have something new and exciting to show again and again. So it was a fun challenge to have.
I have two questions about the Gaultier piece that you showed. One was about how you went about acquiring that particular one. Were there multiple ones that you could choose, and how does one go about obtaining that? And then the second question is, are there any other contemporary designers today that are doing collaborations with jewelry designers?
So I'm trying to remember how this came about. I can't remember if I saw it on like style.com or if we got the presentation book, but we learned about the presentation, and we saw that Mariko was part of it, and we're excited and started to talk about acquiring it. It's a challenge to acquire kind of something in real time always, and so there's a lot of permissions that we have to go through. But this had been something that we had long desired as a department, and was actually part of our collection strategy to try and find haute couture that combined jewelry in some way. And I think that we had thought when we put that on our collection strategy that it would be more like the Lanvin examples, where there was an interesting fashion and the jewelry on top of it. And to find it really, the two embedded together was really so perfect, bringing together our fashion, our textile, and our jewelry collections in many ways. And so we had chosen a different look. It was blue and black. I think it was a dress. And our former department chair had looked, and she had instead encouraged us to think about this one because of the ways in which it connected to our Japanese textile collection with that wide obi. And we were thinking about the many ways that we might use this over the course of its life at the MFA. So we chose the piece, and then I worked with a staff member at Gaultier to, kind of hold it, to acquire it, to get it here. And I think that they were as pleased as we were to make it happen. And so we were able to acquire the runway piece. And we did that, in early 2019, shortly after it was presented. Someone asked me your second part of the question in a slightly different way a few weeks ago, and that's what piece what collaboration am I wishing I had and I didn't, and that's kind of an easy answer, because there was one collaboration I really wanted to have. I tried really hard and wasn't able to get it, and that was Sean Lane and Alexander McQueen. They had an incredible partnership in making jewelry for McQueen's fashions that went throughout McQueen's career, and I really wanted to have one of those spectacular pieces. Sean Lane, a number of years ago, had sold his archives at auction, and so we had to go back through the buyers of the auction to see if we could get some of those pieces back, and we weren't able to borrow them in the end. I held out hope till like the very last moment, but that's the one thing that I wish was there and that I would like to acquire that we don't have.
I've seen some brooches that actually become a part of a tiara. Have you ever run into that?
In the jewelry gallery, there's a corsage ornament that's also featured in the video that has these brooches that unscrew and come off. And they're similar to styles that I have seen in tiaras, where there are elements that come on and off. It's something that that you expect more to see in fine jewelry than costume jewelry, but I think one of the things that really is so delightful about this collection is that many of those design elements that you usually see in very expensive fine jewelry are used in this jewelry as well to create really innovative, creative designs that force the wearer to think about wearing things differently. So we don't have something like that here, but there's lots of other ways that these jewelry objects come apart and can be worn different ways. It makes sense if you're making that kind of a purchase that you have different options.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us here today, and thank you for the wonderful lecture, Emily.